On the polished marble floors of Westfield Academy, 13-year-old Marco scrubbed tirelessly after hours, his vitiligo-marked hands raw from cleaning chemicals, when billionaire tech mogul Richard Harrington spotted him during a late-night board meeting. He didn't just stare. He pointed, laughed, and loudly asked his colleagues if the janitor's kid had some kind of contagious disease they should worry about. What Richard couldn't possibly know was that Marco's mother wasn't just any cleaner. She was the personal housekeeper to the Vice President of the United States, who treated her family like his own. Within minutes of Richard's cruel mockery, 3 black SUVs pulled into the school parking lot, and stern-faced Secret Service agents in dark suits and earpieces strode purposefully toward the boardroom, asking specifically for the man in the custom Italian suit who had just belittled a child. What connection did this humble janitor's son have to the highest offices of power in America? If you love stories of unexpected justice, please subscribe to our channel. Marco's knees ached against the hard marble as he worked his way down the empty hallway. Most students and teachers had long gone home, leaving only the night cleaning staff and, tonight, the school board meeting in the East Wing. His mother usually took this shift, but her fever this morning had left Marco to fill in. They couldn't afford to lose the extra income. He dipped his scrub brush into the bucket, the lemony chemical scent burning his nostrils. The special cleaning solution was required for the imported Italian marble that Westfield Academy had installed last year, just one of many reminders that this place wasn't built for kids like him. The sound of boisterous voices echoed down the corridor. The board meeting must be taking a break. Marco kept his head down, focusing on the stubborn black scuff mark that wouldn't budge. He'd learned that invisibility was sometimes the best strategy. Heavy footsteps approached, accompanied by the distinct smell of expensive cologne. Marco shifted to the side of the hallway without looking up, making room for whoever was passing. Christ, what is wrong with his skin? The voice was low but deliberately audible. Marco's stomach clenched as he continued scrubbing, pretending not to hear. It's that condition. What's it called? When they lose pigment? Looks like a damn Dalmatian. Marco's hands stilled for just a moment before he forced himself to keep working. The white patches of vitiligo across his brown skin had appeared 3 years ago, spreading slowly across his hands, arms, and face in irregular patterns. Is it contagious? Should we even have him cleaning here? Laughter followed, multiple voices now. Marco could feel their eyes on him, but he refused to look up. Years of similar comments had taught him that acknowledgement only encouraged them. Harrington, for God's sake, a woman's voice cut in quietly. Let's get back to the meeting. I'm just asking a legitimate question about health standards, Claudia, the first voice replied, slick with false concern. We pay extraordinary tuition for our children to attend this institution. Shouldn't we know if the cleaning staff has communicable conditions? Marco recognized the name now. Richard Harrington, tech billionaire, major donor to Westfield Academy, and father to Justin Harrington, a senior who drove a Maserati to school and never spoke to underclassmen. He's just a kid, the woman, Claudia, murmured. He's the janitor's kid, Harrington corrected, and if he's old enough to work here, he's old enough to answer some basic questions. Marco felt a polished leather shoe nudge his bucket, sending soapy water sloshing over the rim and onto the floor he'd just cleaned. He still didn't look up. Hey, Spot, I'm talking to you. Harrington's voice had lost its veneer of concern, revealing the cruel curiosity underneath. What's wrong with your skin? Is it catching? Marco finally raised his eyes, meeting Harrington's gaze directly. The man stood in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than 6 months of Marco's mother's salary. Behind him, 4 other board members looked uncomfortable but silent. Only the woman, Claudia, seemed genuinely distressed, her eyes communicating an apology she didn't voice. It's vitiligo, sir. It's not contagious. Marco's voice came out steadier than he felt. I need to finish this hallway before the meeting ends. Harrington's mouth twisted into something between a smile and a sneer. Vitiligo. Sounds exotic. Is that what they have in whatever country you're from? I'm from Philadelphia, sir. Marco picked up his scrub brush again, determined to end the conversation. Well, Philadelphia should take better care of its exports. Harrington chuckled, turning to his colleagues. Maybe we should implement a new hiring policy, basic health screening for the help? As the group moved away, Marco heard Harrington's voice floating back down the hallway. Seriously, though, it looked like someone splashed bleach on him. Did you see his hands? Like he's wearing strange gloves. Marco waited until they turned the corner before setting down his brush, his hands trembling slightly. He pulled out his phone, hesitated, then put it back in his pocket. His mother needed rest. Not another problem to worry about, but someone else had heard every word. The night guard, Mr. Wilson, stood silently at the far end of the hallway, his face grim as he pulled out his own phone and stepped into the security office. Marco retreated to the janitor's closet, sliding down against the wall until he sat on the cold concrete floor. The small room smelled of bleach and pine cleaner, oddly comforting in its familiarity. He pulled his knees to his chest and pressed, his forehead against them, taking deep breaths the way his mother had taught him. "Count to 10, mijo," she always said. "The words only have power if you give it to them." But tonight, Harrington's mockery cut deeper than usual. Maybe because Marco was tired, maybe because the vitiligo had spread to a new patch on his neck last week, or maybe because he'd foolishly hoped that working at this prestigious school might somehow be different from his regular middle school. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from Mr. Wilson. "You okay, kid?" Saw what happened. Marco texted back quickly. "I'm fine, thanks." He wasn't fine, but what was the alternative? Crying wouldn't change his skin. Complaining wouldn't make Harrington less cruel, and quitting meant no money for his mother's medicine this month. After a few more deep breaths, Marco pulled out his phone again and called his mother. It rang 3 times before she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "Marco, is everything okay?" "Yeah." "Mama, just checking on you. Did you take your medicine?" Elena Reyes coughed slightly before answering. "Yes, I took it." "How is the cleaning going? Are you being careful with the marble floors like I showed you?" Marco smiled despite himself. Even sick, his mother worried about whether he was cleaning. "Properly, yes, Mama. The floors are perfect." He paused, then asked, "Do you think you'll be better by tomorrow for your regular job?" "The vice president told me to take another day," Elena said, her voice warming. "Mrs. Kincaid brought soup earlier. They're so good to us, Marco." Marco nodded, though his mother couldn't see him. The vice president's family had been Elena's employers for 6 years now, ever since they'd moved to Washington. Unlike other wealthy families she'd worked for, they treated her with genuine respect, almost like family. "They ask about you all the time," Elena continued. "The vice president's daughter showed me your last art project. She keeps it on her desk, you know. Tell them I said hi," Marco said automatically. He'd met the vice president's family many times over the years, joining his mother at their home for various holidays and occasions when they insisted she bring her son rather than work alone. Marco almost mentioned what had happened with Harrington, but stopped himself. His mother would only worry, and she needed rest. "Mama, I should get back to work. I still have the East Wing to finish." "Okay, mijo, don't stay too late, and lock up properly when you leave." "I will. And Marco, I'm proud of you. So proud." Marco's eyes stung with sudden tears. "Thanks, Mama. Get some rest." After hanging up, Marco stayed seated for a moment longer, gathering his strength. Then he stood, splashed cold water on his face from the utility sink, and prepared to return to his cleaning cart. What Marco didn't know was that Elena hadn't immediately gone back to sleep. Something in her son's voice had worried her. A tightness she recognized from years of raising a child who often hid his pain. She picked up her phone again and made another call. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm sorry to bother you so late." "Yes, I'm feeling better, thank you." She paused, listening. "Actually, I'm calling about Marco. He's filling in for me at Westfield Academy tonight, and something doesn't feel right. I know it's a lot to ask, but yes, that's the address. Thank you, sir." "I appreciate it more than I can say." Elena hung up and lay back against her pillows. relieved. Benjamin Reynolds, head of the vice president's security detail, had never failed her before. If something was wrong with Marco, she knew he would handle it with discretion and care. What she couldn't have anticipated was just how quickly Reynolds would act, or that he would involve the vice president himself once he learned exactly what had happened in that hallway. The 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans pulled into Westfield Academy's circular driveway precisely 27 minutes after Elena's call. They moved in perfect synchronization, parking in a diagonal formation that allowed quick departure if necessary. The engines remained running as the doors opened simultaneously. From the lead vehicle emerged Benjamin Reynolds, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a military haircut and an earpiece barely visible beneath his suit collar. From the other vehicles, 4 more agents appeared, 3 men and 1 woman, all wearing identical dark suits and alert expressions. "Entrance?" Reynolds asked, not wasting words. "Main lobby, then east to the administrative wing," replied the female agent, consulting her phone. "Board meeting in progress in the founder's room." Reynolds nodded once. "Henderson, Madison, secure the perimeter. Chen, Alvarez, with me." The night guard at the front desk, not Mr. Wilson, but a younger man, named Taylor, looked up in alarm as the imposing group entered the building. "Sir, visiting hours are—" Reynolds flashed his credentials. "Secret Service. We need to speak with someone attending your board meeting." Taylor's eyes widened. "Is there a threat?" "No immediate danger," Reynolds replied, his tone professionally neutral. "But we require immediate access." "Of course, sir. Down the hall, take a right at the trophy case, double doors at the end." Taylor fumbled with his keys. "Do you need me to escort you?" "That won't be necessary." Reynolds gestured to his team, and they moved with purposeful efficiency down the hallway. As they rounded the corner, they encountered Marco, who had returned to his cleaning cart and was methodically working his way down the corridor. He looked up, startled by the sound of multiple footsteps. Reynolds recognized him immediately from family photos in the vice president's home. The boy's distinctive vitiligo confirmed his identity, though Reynolds had never met him in person before. "Marco Reyes?" Reynolds asked, his voice softening slightly. Marco nodded, confused and slightly frightened by the official-looking group. "Yes, sir. Your mother asked us to check on you." Reynolds didn't elaborate further, but his eyes took in Marco's tense posture and slightly reddened eyes. "Are you all right, son?" Before Marco could respond, Mr. Wilson appeared from a side hallway. Upon seeing the agents, he walked directly to Reynolds. "You got here fast," Wilson said quietly. "I'm Greg Wilson, night security. I called it in too, after I saw what happened." Reynolds nodded. "What exactly did happen, Mr. Wilson?" Wilson glanced at Marco, then back to Reynolds. "One of the board members, Richard Harrington, was pretty cruel to the boy about his skin condition, made some nasty comments, got others laughing at him. The kid handled it with more dignity than most adults would have." Reynolds' expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "I see." He turned to Marco. "We're going to have a word with Mr. Harrington. In the meantime, Agent Chen will stay with you." Marco stared at the group in growing alarm. "What's going on? Is my mom okay?" "Your mother is fine," Reynolds assured him. "She was concerned about you and asked us to check in. Nothing to worry about." But Marco wasn't convinced. "Why would Secret Service agents come just because someone was mean to me?" Reynolds exchanged a glance with Wilson, then sighed. "Let's just say the vice president takes a personal interest in the well-being of his staff and their families." Marco's eyes widened. "The vice president knows about this? About me?" "He will shortly," Reynolds replied. Then to the other agents, "Let's proceed." As Reynolds and Alvarez continued toward the board meeting, Chen stayed behind with Marco. "You don't need to do this," Marco said quietly to Chen. It wasn't that big a deal. Chen's expression remained professional, but her eyes were kind. In my experience, when someone says something wasn't that big a deal, it usually was. Besides, we take our orders directly from the vice president, and between us," she lowered her voice slightly, "he doesn't like bullies." Down the hallway, Reynolds and Alvarez approached the double doors of the founder's room. Inside, they could hear Richard Harrington's voice dominating the conversation, confident and commanding. Reynolds straightened his tie, nodded to Alvarez, and pushed open the doors. 6 years earlier, Elena Reyes had stood nervously in the service entrance of a Georgetown townhouse, clutching her resume in slightly trembling hands. After being laid off from her previous housekeeping position, this interview represented not just a job but survival for her and 7-year-old Marco. "Mrs. Reyes," a warm voice had greeted her. "I'm Michael Kincaid. Please, come in." Ellenham had been startled to find the vice president himself answering the door rather than an assistant or butler. Even more surprising was his casual attire, jeans and a Georgetown University sweatshirt, and the genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Sir, it's an honor," she'd managed, momentarily flustered. "Please, in this house, I'm just Michael," he'd insisted, leading her not to a formal office, but to a sun-filled kitchen where his wife Sarah was helping their daughter with homework. That first meeting had set the tone for what became not just employment, but a relationship that defied the typical boundaries between employer and household staff. The Kincaids had never treated Elena as invisible or beneath them, a stark contrast to some of the wealthy families she'd worked for previously. When Marco had developed vitiligo a few years later, it was Sarah Kincaid who had arranged appointments with the country's leading dermatologists. When Elena had caught pneumonia last winter, the vice president himself had driven her to the hospital and stayed until the doctors confirmed she would recover. Most meaningful to Elena was how they treated Marco. From the beginning, they had included him in staff holiday celebrations. As the years passed and trust deepened, Marco began to receive invitations to family movie nights, weekend barbecues, and even joined them for a weekend at Camp David. Marco and the Kincaid's daughter, Sophia, had formed an unlikely friendship despite their different worlds. Both artistic and thoughtful, they bonded over drawing sessions and discussions about books. At 14, Sophia was a year older than Marco, but she never treated him as anything less than an equal. "He sees things differently," Sophia had once told her father when showing him Marco's artwork. "He notices details everyone else misses." The vice president had agreed, especially impressed by Marco's architectural sketches of Washington landmarks. He'd even arranged for one of Marco's drawings of the White House to be framed and hung in his private office. For his part, Marco had always been slightly overwhelmed by the Kincaids' attention. He knew the situation was unusual. His school, friends certainly didn't spend weekends with political figures. But the family's genuine warmth had gradually worn down his natural reserve. The relationship between the families had its complexities, of course. Elena was still an employee, and certain boundaries remained. But the respect flowed both ways, creating a connection that transcended the typical staff dynamic. What neither Elena nor Marco fully understood was just how deeply the vice president considered them part of his extended family. Michael Kincaid had grown up in modest circumstances himself, the son of a factory worker in Michigan. His rise through politics had never dimmed his appreciation for the dignity of work, or his disdain for those who looked down on others based on status or appearance. When Benjamin Reynolds had called the vice president tonight, interrupting a security briefing to explain the situation at Westfield Academy, Kincaid's response had been immediate and unequivocal. "Send a team. Full protocol. I want to know exactly who thought it was acceptable to humiliate a child under our protection." Reynolds had raised an eyebrow at full protocol, the vice presidential motorcade and security response usually reserved for official functions, but he didn't question the order. "And Ben," the vice president had added before hanging up, "make sure Marco knows this isn't his fault. That boy has dealt with enough thoughtless cruelty already." As the Secret Service team had departed for Westfield Academy, the vice president remained in his office, phone in hand, considering his next call. Richard Harrington wasn't just any wealthy businessman. As CEO of Harrington Technologies, he controlled government contracts worth billions, and made substantial political donations to both parties. Antagonizing him would have consequences. The vice president set down his phone and leaned back in his chair, a grim smile forming. Sometimes consequences were exactly what were needed. In the kitchen down the hall, Sarah Kincaid was already packing a container of Elena's favorite soup to deliver to her apartment, while Sophia asked if Marco could come over that weekend to see her new art supplies. In the Kincaid household, family came first. And in their minds, that family included Elena and Marco Reyes. The board meeting halted mid-sentence as Reynolds and Alvarez entered the founder's room. 7 faces turned toward the door, expressions shifting from surprise to confusion to concern. "Gentlemen, ladies," Reynolds said, his voice measured and obtrusively authoritative. "I apologize for the interruption. I'm Benjamin Reynolds, United States Secret Service." Richard Harrington recovered first, rising from his chair at the head of the polished mahogany table. "Is everything all right? Is there some kind of security threat?" "No immediate threat, sir," Reynolds replied, his eyes scanning the room before settling deliberately on Harrington. "We're here on a matter concerning the vice president." A murmur ran through the board members. The school's headmaster, Dr. Franklin, stood nervously. "How can Westfield Academy assist the vice president?" Reynolds ignored the question, instead focusing on Harrington. "Are you Richard Harrington, CEO of Harrington Technologies?" Harrington straightened his already perfect posture, a practiced smile appearing. "I am. Is the vice president interested in our new cybersecurity initiative? We'd be honored to schedule a presentation." "That won't be necessary," Reynolds said flatly. "Mr. Harrington, we'd like to speak with you privately regarding an incident that occurred earlier this evening, involving a minor." The smile faltered. On Harrington's face, replaced briefly by confusion, then understanding, then careful neutrality. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "I believe you do, sir." Reynolds's tone remained professional, but something in his eyes had hardened. "It concerns your interaction with a young man in the hallway approximately 40 minutes ago." The woman Marco had heard, called Claudia, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I think I know what this is about," she said quietly. "Dr. Reyes, isn't it?" Alvarez asked, consulting his tablet. Claudia nodded, surprised at being identified. "Yes, Dr. Claudia Reyes. I'm a dermatologist and Westfield parent." "Perhaps you could share your recollection of the incident," Reynolds suggested. Before she could answer, Harrington cut in. "This is absurd. We had a brief interaction with one of the cleaning staff." "There was no incident. The cleaning staff you're referring to is a 13-year-old boy named Marco Reyes," Reynolds stated. "And according to multiple witnesses, you publicly mocked his medical condition, suggested he might be contagious, and created a hostile environment for a minor in his workplace." The room fell silent. Dr. Franklin paled visibly. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding," Harrington said smoothly, though a flush had begun to creep up his neck. "I merely expressed concern about proper health protocols. As a major donor to this institution, I have every right—" "Mr. Harrington," Alvarez interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "The vice president takes a personal interest in this matter." Another board member, a silver-haired woman, leaned forward. "What exactly is the vice president's interest in our janitor?" "Marco Reyes is the son of Elena Reyes, a valued member of the vice presidential household staff," Reynolds explained. "The Reyes family has been under the protection and care of the office of the vice president for 6 years." Harrington's confident demeanor cracked slightly. "How was I supposed to know that? He's just some kid with a weird skin condition mopping floors." "That weird skin condition is called vitiligo," Dr. Reyes interjected, her professional demeanor giving way to obvious anger. "It's a non-contagious autoimmune disorder that affects pigmentation, and that some kid showed more dignity in 5 minutes than you've displayed in the entire time I've known you, Richard." Reynolds nodded appreciatively at Dr. Reyes before turning back to Harrington. "Mr. Harrington, we'd like you to accompany us to discuss this matter further." "This is ridiculous," Harrington sputtered, looking around for support. "Are you detaining me? Over what?" Hurting a janitor kid's feelings? I want my lawyer. You're not being detained, sir, Reynolds clarified. This isn't a legal matter, yet. The vice president simply wishes to address this situation personally, given his connection to the Reyes family. The implication hung in the air. While not explicitly stated, everyone in the room understood that Richard Harrington's actions had caught the attention of one of the most powerful men in the country. Fine, Harrington said finally, gathering his papers. Let's get this over with. But I want it on record that this is completely unnecessary. I'm a busy man with significant governmental contracts that require my attention. We're well aware of your contracts, Mr. Harrington, Reynolds replied evenly. In fact, I believe several are currently pending renewal approval through the Vice President's office. The color drained from Harrington's face. As the group prepared to leave, Dr. Reyes approached Reynolds. I'd like to speak with Marco, if possible. As a dermatologist specializing in pigmentation disorders, and as someone who witnessed what happened, I think I might be able to help. Reynolds studied her for a moment, then nodded. He's with Agent Chen in the hallway. I think that would be appropriate, Dr. Reyes. As Harrington was escorted from the room, the remaining board members sat in stunned silence, processing the revelation that their seemingly insignificant janitor had connections to the second highest office in the land, and that Richard Harrington's casual cruelty might have consequences beyond anything he could have anticipated. Marco sat on a bench outside the principal's office, his cleaning supplies abandoned in the hallway. Agent Chen stood nearby, her posture relaxed but vigilant. Neither spoke much, Marco too overwhelmed by the evening's events, Chen respecting his need for quiet. In the silence, Marco's mind drifted to the day 3 years ago, when he'd first noticed the small white patch on his hand. He'd shown his mother, who had immediately recognized what it might be from her cousin, who had the same condition. The diagnosis of vitiligo had come quickly, but understanding what it would mean for his life had taken much longer. The first year had been the hardest. The stares, the questions, the occasional cruel comment. Middle school was already difficult without adding visible difference to the mix. Some kids avoided him, afraid it might be contagious despite his explanations. Others were curious, but awkward, asking invasive questions. A few were deliberately mean, making up nicknames that still sometimes echoed in his mind during quiet moments. What had saved him was art. Marco had always enjoyed drawing, but after his diagnosis, it became his refuge. He started with architectural sketches. Buildings didn't judge or stare back. The clean lines and precise angles gave him a sense of control when his own body seemed to be changing without his permission. The vice president had noticed his talent. During a staff holiday gathering, Marco had been sitting quietly in a corner, sketching the elaborate Christmas decorations in the Naval Observatory, when Michael Kincaid had sat down beside him. "You have a remarkable eye for detail," the vice president had said, studying Marco's drawing. "Have you ever considered architecture as a career?" That simple question had opened a door. The next week, a package had arrived containing professional-grade art supplies and several books on architectural drawing. Sophia had started inviting him to sketch with her. Mrs. Kincaid had arranged for him to meet a renowned architect who worked on historical preservation in D.C. The Kincaids never made him feel like a charity case. Instead, they treated his talent as something valuable, worth nurturing. It was the first time Marco had felt truly seen beyond his skin. At school, things remained complicated. His friends were few but loyal, other kids who existed on the social margins for various reasons. They formed a protective circle of sorts, sharing lunch tables and walking together between classes. His art teacher, Ms. Abernathy, had become another ally, giving him extra projects and entering his work in contests without telling him until after he'd won. "Your perspective is unique," she'd told him. "You see beauty in structures others pass by every day." Working as a janitor at Westfield had been his mother's idea initially, a way to earn money for the specialized makeup that could help cover his vitiligo for special occasions if he wanted. Marco rarely used it, preferring to accept his skin as it was. But his mother wanted him to have options. The job was supposed to be temporary, just filling in when his mother was sick. But tonight's encounter with Harrington had made him wonder if he should continue at all. The polished world of Westfield Academy, with its marble floors and wealthy patrons, suddenly felt more foreign than ever. What Marco didn't fully realize was how his dual existence, moving between the rarefied world of the vice presidential household and the ordinary struggles of a middle school janitor, had shaped him in unusual ways. He possessed a quiet dignity and emotional maturity that surprised adults who bothered to look beyond his appearance. "You okay?" Agent Chen asked, breaking the silence. Marco nodded, though in truth he wasn't sure. "Is Mr. Harrington in trouble?" Chen's expression remained neutral. "Let's just say the vice president believes in accountability." Before Marco could ask what that meant, the door to the principal's office opened and Dr. Reyes emerged. Her eyes found Marco immediately, and her expression softened. "Marco, I'm Dr. Claudia Reyes. I was in the hallway earlier when—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I wanted to apologize for not speaking up more forcefully when Mr. Harrington was being inappropriate." Marco shrugged. "It's okay. I'm used to it." "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you," Dr. Reyes said, sitting beside him on the bench. "You shouldn't have to be used to it. And as someone who specializes in conditions like vitiligo, I want you to know that your skin is not a flaw. It's simply a variation of human pigmentation, and quite a beautiful one at that." Marco studied her, searching for signs of insincerity or pity. He found neither. "I run a support group for young people with various skin conditions," she continued. "We focus on art therapy, actually, given your obvious talent." She nodded toward the sketchbook peeking from his backpack. "I thought you might be interested." For the first time that evening, Marco felt a flicker of something positive. "You could tell I'm an artist just from my sketchbook?" Dr. Reyes smiled. "That and Sophia Kincaid has been talking about your amazing architectural drawings for years. My daughter is in her class at Woodrow Wilson." The connection surprised Marco, reminding him how small Washington could sometimes be and how unexpected allies could appear in the most unlikely places. In the founder's room, the remaining board members sat in uncomfortable silence after Harrington and the Secret Service agents departed. Dr. Franklin, the headmaster, loosened his tie and cleared his throat. "Well, that was unexpected." Brenda Whitmore, the silver-haired board treasurer, tapped her manicured nails against the table. "I'm more concerned about what this means for Harrington's donation to the new science wing. We're counting on those funds." "Really, Brenda?" Thomas Chen, the youngest board member, looked at her incredulously. A child was publicly humiliated in our school by one of our board members, and your first concern is money? Brenda straightened her designer jacket. "I'm being practical. Westfield Academy exists to provide elite education, not to coddle the feelings of janitorial staff. That janitorial staff is a 13-year-old boy with a medical condition," Dr. Franklin said, his voice uncharacteristically sharp, "and apparently he has connections that none of us anticipated. That's the real issue, isn't it?" Brenda replied, "If he'd been any other child, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The Secret Service wouldn't have shown up. But because he has connections to the vice president, suddenly everyone cares." An uncomfortable silence followed because everyone knew she was right. James Peterson, the head of the Alumni Association, spoke up. "I think we need to consider our institutional response. If the vice president is personally involved, this could become a PR nightmare or opportunity, depending on how we handle it." "What would you suggest?" Dr. Franklin asked. "A formal apology from the board, perhaps a scholarship fund for students with medical conditions. Something that demonstrates our commitment to inclusivity." "Performative inclusivity after the fact?" Thomas muttered. "Classic. Do you have a better suggestion?" James challenged. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "Yes, actually. We could start by examining why a 13-year-old is working as a janitor in our school to begin with. We could look at our hiring practices, our treatment of service staff, our entire institutional culture. that made it acceptable for Harrington to behave that way without anyone but Dr. Reyes saying anything. The room fell silent again. "That's a substantial undertaking," Dr. Franklin said finally. "Exactly," Thomas replied, "because this is a substantial problem. And it didn't start tonight with Harrington's comments." Brenda rolled her eyes. "You're overreacting. This was an isolated incident." "Was it?" Thomas leaned forward. "Ask your housekeepers, Brenda. Ask the cafeteria staff. Ask the groundskeepers. Ask if this is the first time they've been treated as invisible or less than at Westfield." Dr. Franklin cleared his throat again. "Perhaps we should table this discussion until we understand the full implications of tonight's events. It's getting late, and clearly there are larger forces at play than we anticipated." The board members began gathering their materials, the meeting effectively over. As they filed out, Thomas hung back, approaching Dr. Franklin. "Headmaster, there's something you should know." Dr. Franklin looked weary. "What is it, Thomas?" "I've reviewed Marco Reyes's file. His standardized test scores are in the top percentile nationally. His art teacher at his middle school has submitted his work to multiple competitions which he's won, yet he's working as a janitor here instead of being recruited as a student." Dr. Franklin's eyebrows rose. "How do you know this?" "Because I sit on the Community Outreach Committee that's supposed to identify talented students from underrepresented backgrounds. But somehow, despite literally cleaning our halls, Marco Reyes wasn't on our radar." Thomas's expression was grim. "That's a systemic failure, not an isolated incident." Outside in the hallway, board members dispersed quickly, eager to distance themselves from the evening's drama. Only Dr. Reyes remained, still talking quietly with Marco as the Secret Service agents conferred nearby. Brenda Whitmore walked past them without acknowledgement, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. James Peterson nodded politely but didn't stop. Dr. Franklin approached hesitantly, uncertain of his role in this unfolding situation. Thomas Chen was the only one who directly approached Marco. "I hear you're an artist," he said, crouching slightly to meet Marco's eye level. "I'd love to see your work sometime." Marco looked surprised, but nodded. "Sure, I guess." "Thomas Chen," he introduced himself, offering his hand. "I'm on the board here, and I also teach architecture at Georgetown." Marco's eyes widened slightly as they shook hands. "If you're interested in architecture, my department runs a summer program for young designers." Thomas handed Marco a business card. "No pressure, but the application deadline is next month. Scholarships available." As Thomas walked away, Dr. Reyes gave Marco a gentle smile. "Connections in unexpected places," she murmured. Down the hallway, the other agents were escorting Richard Harrington toward the exit. His earlier confidence noticeably diminished. Reynolds remained with Marco, his phone to his ear. "Yes, sir," he was saying. "We've secured the situation. Mr. Harrington is cooperating, though reluctantly." He paused, listening. "Understood. We'll bring Marco to your office directly." Hanging up, Reynolds turned to Marco. "The vice president would like to see you." Marco swallowed nervously. Despite his familiarity with the Kincaid family, the formal request felt different, official in a way their previous interactions had. "Not been. Am I in trouble?" he asked quietly. Reynolds actually smiled slightly. "No, Marco. But I think Mr. Harrington might be." Marco sat in Dr. Franklin's office, perched awkwardly on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than his mother's monthly salary. Agent Chen stood by the door, while Reynolds set up a secure laptop on the headmaster's desk. "The vice president will be calling momentarily," Reynolds explained, adjusting the screen. "Dr. Franklin has given permission for us to use his office for privacy." Marco nodded, his hands fidgeting in his lap. He'd met the vice president many times over the years, but all was in casual settings: backyard barbecues, holiday gatherings, informal dinners where Michael Kincaid was simply Mr. Michael in a sweater and jeans. This felt different. Official? Serious? Am I supposed to call him Mr. Vice President? Marco whispered to Chen. The agent's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Just be yourself, Marco. He asked for you specifically, not for a formal meeting. Before Marco could ask more questions, the laptop chimed and the screen filled with the familiar face of Vice President Michael Kincaid. Despite the late hour, he looked alert and focused, though he'd removed his tie and rolled up his shirt sleeves. "Marco," the vice president greeted him warmly. "How are you holding up, son?" "I'm okay, sir," Marco replied automatically. The vice president's expression turned knowing. "I've known you since you were 7, Marco. I can tell when you're not okay." Something about the gentle challenge in his voice broke through Marco's careful composure. His shoulders slumped slightly. "It wasn't that bad," he said quietly. "I've heard worse." The vice president's eyes darkened. "That doesn't make it acceptable. Not from anyone, and certainly not from a grown man who should know." "Better." He leaned closer to the camera. "Marco, I want you to understand something important. What happened tonight wasn't your fault. There is nothing wrong with your skin. The only thing wrong was Mr. Harrington's behavior." Marco looked down at his hands, the patchwork of brown and white that had become his identity, whether he wanted it or not. "I know that, sir. Logically, I know that. But emotionally, it still hurts," the vice president finished for him. "I understand. Words have power, especially cruel ones." A silence fell between them, comfortable despite the circumstances. Marco had always appreciated how the vice president never rushed conversations, giving thoughts space to breathe. "Your mother tells me you're still drawing," Kincaid said finally. "Sophia showed me your latest cityscape. The detail is extraordinary." Marco's face brightened slightly. "I've been working on perspective techniques. There's this book on architectural drawing that Mrs. Kincaid gave me, the one by Professor Chen?" The vice president smiled. "I believe you just met the author tonight. Thomas Chen is quite renowned in architectural circles." Marco's eyes widened. "That Professor Chen? He gave me his card. Said something about a summer program, which you should absolutely apply for," Kincaid encouraged. "Thomas doesn't offer those opportunities lightly." The conversation shifted then, moving away from the evening's painful events to Marco's art, his school, his future aspirations. For a few minutes, it felt like any of their previous conversations, the powerful politician taking genuine interest in a boy most people overlooked. Finally, the vice president's expression grew serious again. "Marco, I need to ask you something. Important. What do you want to happen with Mr. Harrington?" Marco blinked, surprised. "What do you mean, sir?" "I mean that actions have consequences," Kincaid explained. "Mr. Harrington behaved unacceptably toward you. There are several ways we could address that. But before decisions are made, I wanted to hear from you." Marco considered the question carefully. Part of him, the hurt, angry part, wanted Harrington to suffer, to feel the same public humiliation he'd inflicted. But another part recognized the disproportion of using the vice president's power against a man whose only crime was cruel words. "I don't want to ruin his life," Marco said finally. "That seems too much." The vice president nodded, seeming pleased with the answer. "You have more compassion than many adults, Marco, but that doesn't mean there shouldn't be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Marco asked. "That's what I'm working on now," Kincaid replied. "Mr. Harrington's company has several pending government contracts that require approval from my office. He also sits on boards of numerous organizations, including Westfield Academy. His actions tonight demonstrate questionable judgment that might be relevant to those positions." Marco's eyes widened as he began to understand the potential implications. "But," the vice president continued, "there might be a more constructive approach, one that creates positive change rather than simply punishment." "Like what?" "I have some ideas," Kincaid said, "but I'd like to hear yours too. What would make Westfield Academy a better place for everyone, not just students, but staff like yourself too?" Marco thought for a moment. "Maybe a program about different medical conditions, so people understand that things like vitiligo aren't scary or contagious." He hesitated, then added, "And maybe scholarships for kids who can't afford to attend, but have talents to contribute." The vice president smiled broadly. "Those are excellent suggestions, Marco. In fact, they align perfectly with what I had in mind. The laptop chimed with an incoming notification. Kincaid glanced down and nodded. "It seems Mr. Harrington has arrived at my office. Time for me to have a different kind of conversation." His expression softened again. "Agent Reynolds will bring you home to your mother. She's feeling better, by the way. Sarah visited her earlier with soup." "Thank you, sir," Marco said sincerely, "for everything." "No thanks needed, Marco. That's what family does." As the call ended and the screen went dark, Marco felt something shift inside him. A quiet recognition that sometimes justice came in unexpected forms, and sometimes the people you thought were invisible were seen after all. Richard Harrington sat alone in a tastefully appointed waiting room, the kind designed to simultaneously impress and intimidate visitors. Original artwork adorned the walls, subtle lighting created an atmosphere of gravitas, and the chairs, while elegant, were just uncomfortable enough to keep occupants on edge. It was working. Despite his wealth and influence, Richard found himself shifting nervously, checking his watch, and trying to ignore the two Secret Service agents positioned discreetly by the door. How had a routine board meeting devolved into this? One moment he was discussing budget allocations for Westfield's new science wing, and the next he was being escorted to the Naval Observatory for a meeting with the Vice President of the United States. All because of some janitor kid with a weird skin condition, the janitor kid who apparently had connections that Richard hadn't imagined possible. He pulled out his phone and checked his email again. 3 urgent messages from his company's government contracts division, all asking if rumors about complications with the Vice President's office were true. One from his PR team suggesting they get ahead of any potential issues, and most worryingly, a terse note from Senator Blackwell canceling their golf game this weekend. Word was spreading fast. Richard loosened his tie slightly, feeling uncharacteristically warm. Harrington Technologies had 5 major contracts pending with various government agencies, collectively worth over $2 billion. All required sign-off from offices that ultimately reported to the Vice President. The door opened and a woman in a crisp suit entered. "Mr. Harrington, I'm Sarah Kincaid." Richard stood quickly, extending his hand. "Mrs. Kincaid, it's an honor to meet you." The second lady didn't take his offered hand. Instead, she regarded him with cool assessment. "My husband will see you shortly." "I wanted to speak with you first." Richard lowered his hand awkwardly. "Of course. Marco Reyes is a remarkable young man," she said without preamble. "He's been part of our family's life for 6 years. His mother, Elena, is not just our housekeeper, but someone we deeply respect. When Marco was diagnosed with vitiligo, I personally took him to 3 different specialists to ensure he received the best care possible." Richard swallowed, beginning to understand the depth of his miscalculation. "He's brilliant, you know," Sarah continued. "His artwork shows extraordinary perspective and technical skill. He's taught Sophia more about architectural design than her private art tutor, and despite facing discrimination and cruelty because of his appearance, he's maintained a kindness that many adults could learn from." "Mrs. Kincaid, if I had known—" "That's precisely the point, Mr. Harrington," she interrupted sharply. "You shouldn't need to know someone's connections to treat them with basic human dignity. Marco deserved respect, regardless of who his mother works for." Richard had faced tough negotiations and hostile takeovers throughout his career, but nothing had prepared him for the quiet intensity of Sarah Kincaid's disappointment. "What exactly does the Vice President want from me?" he asked. "Finally, my husband will explain that himself," she replied. "But I suggest you listen carefully. Marco asked that we not ruin your life over this incident. That was his choice, a compassionate one that, frankly, I'm not sure you deserve." Before Richard could respond, the inner door opened, and a staff member appeared. "The Vice President will see you now, Mr. Harrington." Richard stood, straightening his jacket, with hands that weren't quite steady. Sarah Kincaid's voice stopped him as he reached the door. "Mr. Harrington, whatever my husband proposes, I recommend you accept it gratefully. The alternatives would be less pleasant for your company's future." The vice president's office was less formal than Richard expected. Bookshelves lined with well-worn volumes, family photos alongside official portraits, a desk cluttered with active work rather than staged for impression. Michael Kincaid himself sat not behind the imposing desk, but in one of two armchairs positioned near a window overlooking the gardens. Mr. Harrington, the vice president, greeted him, not rising. "Please, have a seat." Richard sat carefully in the adjacent chair, noticing the folder in Kincaid's hands. The vice president opened it, revealing what appeared to be printouts of government contracts. "Harrington Technologies," Kincaid began conversationally. "Impressive growth over the past decade. Your cybersecurity division has become particularly successful, hasn't it? Almost $2 billion in government contracts last year alone." "Yes, sir," Richard confirmed, a flicker of hope rising. Perhaps this would be a business discussion after all. "And currently, you have 5 major contracts pending." "Approval," Kincaid continued, flipping through the papers, "including a particularly lucrative one with the Department of Defense." The hope evaporated as quickly as it had appeared. "Mr. Vice President, about what happened tonight? You publicly humiliated a 13-year-old boy because of a medical condition," Kincaid interrupted, his voice still conversational, but with an edge of steel underneath. "You implied he was contagious, suggested he shouldn't be employed, and treated him as less than human, all while in a position of authority as a board member of an educational institution." Put so bluntly, Richard felt a rare sensation, genuine shame. It was a momentary lapse in judgment. Was it? Kincaid looked up from the folder, his gaze direct and penetrating. Or was it simply the first time your casual cruelty had consequences? Richard had no answer for that. "Here's what's going to happen," the vice president said, closing the folder. "You're going to have a choice, Mr. Harrington, and unlike the choice you made tonight, I suggest you make this one very carefully." As the vice president outlined his proposal, Richard felt the foundations of his carefully constructed world begin to shift beneath him. By the time the meeting ended 30 minutes later, Richard Harrington, one of the most powerful tech executives in the country, understood exactly how it felt to be at someone else's mercy. It wasn't a feeling he enjoyed, but perhaps it was one he needed to experience. The ride home from Westfield Academy was quiet. Agent Reynolds drove while Marco sat in the back seat, watching the familiar neighborhoods of Washington pass by his window. The events of the evening felt surreal now, like something from a movie, rather than his actual life. "We're here," Reynolds announced as they pulled up to the modest apartment building where Marco lived with his mother. "Thank you for the ride," Marco said, reaching for the door handle. "I'll walk you up," Reynolds replied, not a request but a statement. They climbed the 3 flights of stairs in silence. When they reached apartment 3C, the door opened before Marco could even knock. Elena stood there, still in her robe, but looking much better than she had that morning, her worried expression melting into relief at the sight of her son. "Marco," she breathed, pulling him into a tight hug. Over his shoulder, she mouthed a silent thank you to Reynolds. "Everything's fine, Mama," Marco assured her as they separated. It was just a misunderstanding. Elena's expression made it clear she didn't believe that for a second, but she nodded anyway. "Come inside. There's someone here to see you." Marco stepped into the small living room and stopped short. Dr. Claudia Reyes sat on their worn couch, a portfolio case beside her. "Dr. Reyes?" Marco asked, confused. "How did you—" "I hope you don't mind," she said, standing. "I asked Agent Reynolds if I could follow you home. I wanted to continue our conversation from earlier, and I brought something I think might interest you." Elena looked between them. "You've met Dr. Reyes before?" "Just tonight," Marco explained. "She was at the board meeting." Understanding dawned on Elena's face. "You were there when that man said those things to my son?" Dr. Reyes nodded, her expression somber. "I was, Mrs. Reyes. And I want you to know I deeply regret not speaking up more forcefully in the moment." Elena studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the couch. "Please sit. Would you like some tea?" As Elena went to the kitchen, Marco sat cautiously on the armchair across from Dr. Reyes. "You didn't have to come all this way." Actually, I did, she replied, opening the portfolio case. Marco, I meant what I said earlier about the support group I run, but there's more to it than that. She pulled out several large photographs and laid them on the coffee table. They showed teenagers and young adults with various visible differences, birthmarks, scars, skin conditions, all engaged in creating art. This is the Visible Arts program, Dr. Reyes explained. I started it 5 years ago after my own daughter was severely burned in an accident. Her physical recovery was just the beginning. The psychological impact of suddenly looking different, of facing stares and questions and sometimes cruelty, that was the harder battle. Marco looked more closely at the photos, noticing now that several of the young people had burn scars. Art became her therapy, Dr. Reyes continued. A way to express what she couldn't say in words, and eventually it became her strength. She's at RUSD now, studying graphic design. Elena returned with tea, setting cups for everyone before sitting beside Marco on the arm of his chair. Her hand rested protectively on his shoulder. The program meets twice weekly, Dr. Reyes explained. We have professional artists who volunteer their time, exhibitions at local galleries, even a scholarship fund for participants who want to pursue art education. It sounds amazing, Marco said sincerely, but he hesitated, glancing at his mother. But we couldn't afford something like that, Elena finished for him, her voice matter-of-fact rather than embarrassed. That's just it, Dr. Reyes smiled. The program is completely free to participants. It's funded through grants and private donations. She pulled another item from her portfolio, a sketchbook with a handwritten note attached. My daughter asked me to give you this. She heard about what happened tonight from Sophia Kincaid, their friends at school. Marco accepted the sketchbook, reading the note silently. Dear Marco, Mom told me what happened. Some people suck, but some people get it. I thought you might like a new sketchbook for architectural drawings. Mom says you're really good. Maybe you can show me sometime? I'm more into digital art now, but I still remember what it was like when people first saw my scars instead of me. It gets better, I promise. Lily Reyes P.S. The VAP crew is cool. You should come. Marco looked up, unexpectedly moved by the note. From a stranger who somehow understood exactly what he was feeling. I'd like that, he said quietly. To see the program, I mean. Dr. Reyes smiled. Wonderful. We meet Tuesdays and Thursdays after school. This Thursday, Thomas Chen, who you met tonight, is giving a workshop on architectural perspective. Elena squeezed Marco's shoulder. This Thursday works with our schedule. As they discussed the details, Marco felt something he hadn't expected after the humiliation of earlier that evening, a sense of possibility. Dr. Reyes hadn't just witnessed his worst moment. She'd responded by opening a door to something new. When Agent Reynolds prepared to leave, escorting Dr. Reyes, she paused at the door. One more thing, Marco. The Vice President mentioned you're interested in a summer architecture program? Marco nodded, remembering Thomas Chen's business card still in his pocket. Well, as it happens, I sit on the scholarship committee, Dr. Reyes said with a smile. And I have a feeling your application would be very competitive. After they left, Elena hugged Marco again, holding him tightly. You know, she said softly, sometimes the worst moments lead us to the best people. Marco thought about Dr. Reyes, who had remained silent in that hallway, but had found her voice afterward in a more meaningful way. Sometimes allies appeared when and where you least expected them. Vice President Kincaid sat back in his chair, watching Richard Harrington's face as the tech executive processed what he'd just heard. Let me make sure I understand, Harrington said carefully. You want me to fund an anti-bullying initiative? At Westfield Academy? Not just any initiative, Kincaid corrected. A comprehensive program that includes education about visible differences and medical conditions, sensitivity training for staff and students, and a scholarship fund specifically for students with physical differences who demonstrate academic or artistic merit. And the alternative? Harrington asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. The alternative, Kincaid replied evenly, is that I express my office's concerns about the character and judgment of Harrington Technologies' leadership to the relevant contract approval committees. I believe the phrase they use in such cases is failure to meet ethical standards required of government contractors. Harrington's jaw tightened. That's blackmail. No, Mr. Harrington, that's consequences. Kincaid leaned forward slightly. What you did tonight demonstrated a fundamental lack of character. In my experience, people who mock children for medical conditions they can't control are rarely the type of people who should be trusted with sensitive government contracts. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. How much? Harrington finally asked. For this initiative you're proposing, $10 million, Kincaid said without hesitation. Initial funding of $2 million for the first year, with the remainder placed in an endowment to ensure the program's continuity. Harrington blanched. That's excessive, is it? Kincaid raised an eyebrow. Your company stands to make hundreds of millions from those pending contracts, and more importantly, your actions tonight would have done incalculable damage to a child's self-worth if left unaddressed. The vice president stood, walking to his desk, where he retrieved a manila folder. This contains the full proposal, including budget allocations and program details. Dr. Claudia Reyes, who you met tonight, has agreed to serve as medical advisor. Thomas Chen will oversee the scholarship component. The initiative will be named the Elena Reyes Program for Inclusion and Understanding after Marco's mother. You've thought this through, Harrington observed, accepting the folder. I believe in being prepared, Kincaid replied, and in giving people the opportunity to correct their mistakes. Harrington opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. And if I agree to this, what happens to my contracts? They proceed through the normal approval process, without any input from my office, positive or negative. Kincaid returned to his seat. I should mention that the proposal includes a personal appearance component. You would be expected to speak at the program's launch about the importance of respect and inclusion. Harrington's head snapped up. You want me to publicly admit what I did? I want you to publicly support a worthy initiative, Kincaid corrected. The specifics of tonight's incident need not be mentioned, though I imagine rumors are already circulating among the board members who witnessed it. Harrington considered this, calculating the costs against the benefits with the same analytical mind that had built his business empire. $10 million was substantial, but losing those government contracts would be catastrophic, and the public relations benefits of attaching his name to an inclusion initiative might actually offset some of the cost. What about the boy, Marco? Harrington asked suddenly. What does he get out of this? The question seemed to surprise Kincaid. Aside from a school environment that might finally recognize his value, nothing directly. This isn't about buying his forgiveness, Mr. Harrington. It's about creating systemic change so that what happened to him doesn't happen to others. Harrington nodded slowly, a flicker of something like respect crossing his features. Clever. If I'd offered him money directly, I'd look worse. This way, you get the program you want, the school gets funding, and I get to save face while keeping my contracts. If that's how you need to frame it to yourself, so be it, Kincaid said. But I hope that somewhere in this process, you might reflect on why you felt entitled to mock a child for something he cannot control. Harrington closed the folder. I'll need to consult with my legal team, of course. Of course, you have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to decide. Kincaid stood again, signaling the end of the meeting. One more thing, Mr. Harrington, this arrangement remains between us. If you attempt to retaliate against Marco or his mother in any way, or if you characterize this as extortion to anyone, our agreement is void, and those contracts will be the least of your concerns. Understood, Harrington said stiffly as he rose. Is that all, Mr. Vice President? Almost. Kincaid walked to the door, then paused. My wife suggested I ask you to consider how you'd feel if someone treated your son Justin the way you treated Marco tonight. Something flickered in Harrington's eyes, a brief vulnerability quickly masked. Justin doesn't have any medical conditions. Not visible ones, perhaps, Kincaid replied. But I understand he struggled with dyslexia for years. An invisible difference but no less real to him. The color drained from Harrington's face. "How did you—" "Good night, Mr. Harrington," Kincaid interrupted, opening the door, where a Secret Service agent waited to escort the executive out. "My office will expect your decision by 9 a.m. As the door closed behind Harrington, Sarah Kincaid emerged from the adjoining room where she had been listening to the entire exchange. "You think he'll agree?" she asked, moving to stand beside her husband. Michael nodded. "He will. He's calculating the cost-benefit now, and he'll determine this is his least damaging option." "And you're satisfied with that?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Even if he's doing the right thing for the wrong reasons?" The vice president smiled slightly. "I'm more interested in results than intentions. Besides," he glanced at his watch, "Marco should be home by now, and I have a feeling Dr. Reyes' visit will do more for him than any punishment I could." "Devise for Harrington," Sarah slipped her arm through his. "You're a good man, Michael Kincaid." "I'm just trying to use this position for something worthwhile," he replied, leading her from the office, "and reminding people that everyone deserves dignity, especially though society too often overlooks." Elena Reyes sat at her small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. Marco had finally fallen asleep after the tumultuous evening, but sleep eluded her. Her thoughts kept returning to the moment she'd called. Benjamin Reynolds and all that had unfolded afterward. She hadn't meant to involve the vice president. She'd only wanted someone to check on Marco to make sure he was okay. But Reynolds had called the vice president directly after learning what happened, and Michael Kincaid had responded with the full force of his office. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Who would be visiting at this hour? She approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. Sarah Kincaid stood in the hallway. Accompanied by a female Secret Service agent, Helena quickly opened the door. "Mrs. Kincaid, is everything all right?" Sarah smiled warmly. "Everything's fine, Helena. May I come in? I hope it's not too late." "Of course, please." Elena stepped aside, suddenly self-conscious about their modest apartment compared to the elegant Naval Observatory residence where she worked. Sarah entered, immediately making herself at home in the small living room. The Secret Service agent remained outside in the hallway. "I wanted to check on you personally," Sarah explained. "Michael told me what happened with Marco tonight." Elena nodded, resuming her seat at the kitchen table as Sarah joined her. "It was, difficult, but Marco is resilient. He's sleeping now." "Good." Sarah reached across the table, covering Elena's hand with her own. "I also wanted to tell you that the situation with Richard Harrington has been addressed. Michael offered him a choice: fund a major inclusion initiative at Westfield Academy or face scrutiny regarding his government contracts." Elena's eyes widened. "The vice president did that for Marco?" "He did that because it was right," Sarah corrected gently. "What happened to Marco tonight was wrong, and there needed to be consequences." Elena nodded slowly, processing this information. "The initiative, what will it involve?" "Education about visible differences, sensitivity training, and a scholarship fund for students with physical differences," Sarah explained, "and Michael insisted it be named after you." "After me?" Elena's hand flew to her chest in surprise. "But why? I wasn't even there." "Because you've raised an extraordinary son," Sarah replied, "and because the program is about seeing the whole person beyond appearances, something you've always done in our home." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. For 6 years, she had worked quietly in the Kincaid's household, doing her job with dignity and care. She had never expected recognition, had never sought the spotlight. To have a program named after her seemed surreal. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't need to say anything," Sarah assured her. "There's one more thing, though. Tomorrow morning there will be a brief meeting at Westfield Academy with Dr. Franklin, Thomas Chen, Dr. Reyes, and, if he agrees to the proposal, Richard Harrington. Michael would like you to attend." Elena straightened. "I'll be there." "Good," Sarah smiled. "Agent Miller will pick you up at 9. As they continued talking, Elena felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in her son's dignity, gratitude for the Kincaid support, and beneath it all, a quiet anger that had been building since she first learned what had happened to Marco. The next morning, Elena dressed with particular care in her best suit. The one she wore to church on special occasions. Marco had left early with Dr. Reyes to visit the Visible Arts program before school, so Elena rode alone with Agent Miller to Westfield Academy. As they pulled into the circular driveway, she saw several cars already parked, including a sleek black Tesla that she assumed belonged to Richard Harrington. The thought of facing the man who had humiliated her son made her stomach tighten, but she squared her shoulders and followed Agent Miller inside. Dr. Franklin's office was larger than Elena expected, with tall windows overlooking the academy's manicured grounds. Dr. Reyes and Thomas Chen were already seated at a conference table, along with another woman Elena didn't recognize. Richard Harrington stood by the window, talking quietly on his phone. He looked up as Elena entered, his conversation faltering. "Mr. Harrington," Agent Miller announced, "this is Elena Reyes, Marco's mother." Harrington ended his call abruptly, slipping the phone into his pocket. Up close, he looked less imposing than Elena had imagined. Just a man in an expensive suit with tired eyes and a carefully neutral expression. "Mrs. Reyes," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "I was just about to sign the agreement for the new initiative." "I see," Elena replied, her voice steady. "And do you understand why such an initiative is necessary?" The room fell silent. Dr. Franklin looked uncomfortable, while Dr. Reyes watched the exchange with quiet intensity. Harrington cleared his throat. "I've been made aware of my inappropriate behavior toward your son. The Vice President has suggested this program as a suitable remedy." "A remedy," Elena repeated. "Is that what you think this is? A transaction to make your problem go away?" Something in her tone made Harrington really look at her for the first time. Not as a housekeeper or as an obstacle to overcome, but as a mother protecting her child. "Mrs. Reyes," he began carefully, "I understand you're upset." "No, Mr. Harrington," Elena interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't think you do understand. For years I have cleaned the homes of powerful people like you. I've been invisible, watching how you behave when you think no one important is looking. Last night, you showed who you truly are when you mocked my son for something he cannot control." Harrington had the grace to look ashamed. "I apologize for my behavior. It was inexcusable." "Yes, it was," Elena agreed. "But this initiative, if you're funding it only to save your contracts, it won't change anything." "Not really." "What would you have me do?" Harrington asked, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his voice. Elena's gaze remained steady. "Learn from this. Truly learn. Because the difference between my son and you isn't his skin, it's his heart." 2 weeks later, the main auditorium of Westfield Academy buzzed with anticipation. Local media filled the back row, cameras positioned to capture the stage where a podium stood flanked by chairs. A banner overhead read, announcing the Elena Reyes Program for Inclusion and Understanding. Backstage, Marco fidgeted with his tie as his mother straightened it for the third time. "You look perfect," Elena assured him, her own nervousness evident in her meticulous attention to his appearance. "I still don't understand why we have to be here," Marco whispered. "Can't they just announce the program without us?" "The Vice President specifically requested our presence," Elena reminded him. "But we don't have to speak if you don't want to." Marco nodded, relieved. Public speaking ranked somewhere between dental surgery and swimming with sharks on his list of feared activities. The backstage door opened, and Vice President Kincaid entered with Sarah. Unlike official events where he appeared in formal attire, today he wore a simple navy suit with no tie, deliberate casualness that put the focus on the program rather than his office. "Elena, Marco," he greeted them warmly. "Thank you for being here today." "It's our honor, sir," Elena replied. Michael Kincaid crouched slightly to meet Marco's eye level. "How are you holding up, Marco?" "I know this isn't easy." Marco shrugged. "I'm okay. Dr. Reyes showed me the art studio yesterday. It's pretty amazing." "Good." The Vice President smiled. "Remember, you don't have to do anything today, but be present. Though if you change your mind and want to say something, that's fine too." A staff member appeared at the door. "5 minutes, Mr. Vice President." Kincaid nodded acknowledgement, then turned back to Marco and Elena. "Ready?" They followed him through a side door that led directly to the stage. Already seated were Dr. Franklin, Dr. Reyes, Thomas Chen, and Richard Harrington. The audience, composed of students, faculty, board members, and press, quieted as the vice president took his place at the podium. "Good morning," Kincaid began. "I'm here today not in my official capacity, but as a longtime supporter of Westfield Academy and as someone who believes deeply in the power of education to transform lives and perspectives." Marco and Elena took their seats to the side of the stage, partially shielded from the audience's direct view, a consideration Marco appreciated. "Today, I'm pleased to announce the establishment of the Elena Reyes Program for Inclusion and Understanding," Kincaid continued. "This initiative, generously funded by Harrington Technologies, will create comprehensive education about visible differences and medical conditions, implement sensitivity training for all members of the Westfield community, and establish a scholarship fund for talented students with physical differences." Applause filled the auditorium. Marco noticed several students in the front row with visible differences of their own. A girl with a port wine-stained birthmark, a boy with what appeared to be alopecia, another with severe scoliosis. Dr. Reyes had invited them specially, he knew. "The program is named for Elena Reyes," the vice president explained, "a woman whose quiet dignity, compassion, and strength have touched many lives, including my own family's. Elena exemplifies the values this program seeks to instill, seeing beyond appearances to recognize the full humanity in every person." Elena blinked rapidly, fighting tears as the audience applauded again. Marco squeezed her hand. "I'll now invite Richard Harrington, CEO of Harrington Technologies, to say a few words about his company's commitment to this initiative." Harrington approached the podium, his usual commanding presence somewhat subdued. He looked different than he had that night in the hallway, less arrogant, more thoughtful. "Thank you, Mr. Vice President," he began. "Harrington Technologies is proud to fund this important program with an initial commitment of $2 million for the first year and an additional $8 million for an endowment to ensure its continuity." He paused, glancing briefly at Marco, before continuing. "This initiative was born from a moment of personal failure, a failure to see beyond surface appearances, a failure to treat a young person with the dignity every human being deserves." A murmur ran through the audience. This wasn't the corporate speech they had expected. 2 weeks ago, I encountered a young man in the hallway of this school. I saw only his appearance, specifically his vitiligo, a condition affecting skin, pigmentation. I failed to see his intelligence, his artistic talent, his character, or his dignity. I made thoughtless, hurtful comments that no child should ever have to endure. Marco stared at Harrington in shock. The vice president hadn't mentioned that Harrington would be publicly acknowledging what had happened. "That young man is here today," Harrington continued, "though I won't identify him unless he wishes to be recognized. What I want him, and all of you, to know is that my company's financial commitment to this program is matched by my personal commitment to do better, to learn from my mistake, and to use my influence to create a community where such behavior is neither accepted nor tolerated." Dr. Franklin spoke next, followed by Dr. Reyes, who outlined the medical education component, and Thomas Chen, who explained the scholarship program. Throughout their presentations, Marco noticed Harrington watching him thoughtfully, as if seeing him properly for the first time. As the formal portion of the event concluded, the vice president returned to the podium for closing remarks. "Before we end today, I want to acknowledge that programs and policies are important, but real change happens in individual hearts and minds. It happens when we choose to see each other fully, to recognize our shared humanity despite our differences." He looked directly at Marco then, a question in his eyes. Marco hesitated, then gave a small nod. "I believe Marco Reyes has something he'd like to share," the vice president said, stepping away from the podium. Marco's heart pounded as he rose from his chair. He hadn't planned to speak, hadn't prepared anything. But suddenly, standing before The podium, looking out at the students with visible differences in the front row, he knew exactly what he needed to say. 3 months after the press conference, Westfield Academy's art gallery transformed for a special exhibition. The normally austere space now burst with color and life. Walls adorned with paintings, photographs, and mixed media pieces created by participants in the Visible Arts program. At the center of the main hall stood Marco's contribution, a series of architectural drawings depicting famous Washington buildings, but with a twist. Each structure incorporated elements that celebrated different skin conditions and physical differences. The Washington Monument featured vitiligo-like patterns of light and dark stone. The Lincoln Memorial included figures with various visible differences among the crowd. The Capitol Dome incorporated patterns reminiscent of birthmarks and scars. "It's like you've reimagined the city," Dr. Reyes said, standing beside Marco as they surveyed his work, making visible what's usually hidden. "That was the idea," Marco explained, "to show that differences can be structural, intentional, even beautiful, not just accidents or flaws." In the 3 months since joining the Visible Arts program, Marco had flourished. Twice-weekly sessions with other young people who understood his experience had given him a community. Professional artists who volunteered their time had helped him refine his techniques. And Dr. Reyes had become not just a mentor, but a friend. The gallery began filling with visitors for the exhibition's opening night. Students and faculty from Westfield mingled with families and community members. Local arts reporters circulated, cameras flashing occasionally to capture particularly striking pieces. "Nervous?" Elena asked, appearing at Marco's side in a new dress she'd bought specially for the occasion. Marco smiled. "A little, but good nervous, you know." Elena nodded, understanding perfectly. Since the program's inception, her life had changed too. She still worked for the Kincaids, but she'd also taken on a part-time role as community liaison for the Elena Reyes program, helping identify students who might benefit from its resources. "Vice President and Mrs. Kincaid just arrived," Elena said quietly, "and Sophia is with them." Marco glanced toward the entrance where the second family was being greeted by Dr. Franklin. Sophia caught his eye and waved enthusiastically. "Oh, and Dr. Chen is looking for you," Elena added. "Something about your application for the summer program." Before Marco could respond, Thomas Chen approached, a formal envelope in hand. "Marco, just the person I wanted to see." "Professor Chen," Marco greeted him. "Is that?" Thomas smiled, handing him the envelope. "The admissions committee made their decision yesterday. I thought you might want to open it here, surrounded by your work." Marco accepted the envelope with slightly trembling hands. The Georgetown University Summer Architecture program was highly competitive, accepting only 15 students nationwide each year. Despite Professor Chen's encouragement and Dr. Reyes' support on the scholarship committee, Marco had tried not to get his hopes up. "Go on," Elena urged gently. "Open it." Marco carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. His eyes scanned the first paragraph, then widened. "I got in," he whispered, then louder. "I got in." "With a full scholarship?" Elena embraced him tightly, tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, mijo," Thomas Chen beamed. "The committee was particularly impressed with your portfolio, especially your reimagining of historical buildings. You have a unique perspective, Marco. That's valuable in architecture." As the news spread among the exhibition attendees, Marco found himself surrounded by well-wishers. Dr. Reyes and her daughter Lily, the Kincaids, fellow artists from the program, even Dr. Franklin, who seemed genuinely pleased by Marco's success. "This calls for a proper celebration," the vice president declared. "Sarah and I would like to host a small dinner next weekend if that works for you and Elena." "That would be wonderful, sir," Elena replied. "Thank you." As the evening progressed, Marco circulated through the gallery, occasionally explaining his work to interested visitors. He felt different than he had 3 months ago, more confident, less concerned about the stares his skin sometimes attracted. The program hadn't eliminated all difficulties, but it had given him tools to navigate them and, more importantly, a community that understood. Near the end of the evening, Marco noticed a familiar figure standing alone before his architectural series, Richard Harrington. The tech executive studied the drawings intently, seemingly unaware of Marco's approach. "Mr. Harrington," Marco said quietly. Harrington turned, surprise flashing briefly across his face. "Marco, your work is extraordinary. Truly." "Thank you," Marco replied, searching the man's face for any trace of the contempt he'd shown that night in the hallway. He found none. "I particularly appreciate how you've incorporated the vitiligo patterns into the Washington Monument," Harrington continued, gesturing to the drawing. "The contrast between light and dark creates a visual rhythm that's quite striking." Marco blinked, surprised by the genuine appreciation in Harrington's analysis. "That's exactly what I was trying to achieve." A slightly awkward silence fell between them, the history of their first encounter impossible to completely forget. "I've been learning," Harrington said finally, "about vitiligo, about other visible differences. The program has been educational. For me as well." Marco nodded, not quite ready to offer absolution, but acknowledging the effort. "Dr. Reyes is a good teacher." "She is." Harrington hesitated, then added, "My son Justin has been attending some of the educational sessions. His dyslexia isn't visible like vitiligo, but he's faced his own challenges. He said the program has helped him feel less broken." Something in the vulnerability of this admission touched Marco. "None of us are broken, Mr. Harrington, just different." Harrington smiled slightly. "A lesson I learned later in life than I should have. But I'm grateful to be learning it now." As Harrington moved on to view other exhibits, Marco felt a sense of closure. The man who had mocked him would never be his friend, but perhaps he had become something more valuable, someone who had learned to see differently and might help others do the same. Richard Harrington sat in his home office reviewing the quarterly reports for the Elena Reyes program. 6 months had passed since that night in the hallway, 6 months of unexpected change and personal reckoning. The initial $2 million had been deployed effectively. Curriculum development was complete, with educational modules about various visible differences already implemented across all grade levels at Westfield. The sensitivity training for staff had received national attention from educational journals, and the scholarship fund had awarded its first 5 recipients, including a girl with severe scoliosis who'd been accepted to Princeton. What had begun as forced penance, a transaction to save his government contracts, had evolved into something Richard found himself genuinely invested in. He'd attended every board meeting for the program, contributed ideas beyond financial support, and even brought in expertise from Harrington Technologies' accessibility team to help develop digital resources. The door to his office opened, and his son Justin entered. At 17, Justin strongly resembled his father in appearance, but possessed a gentleness Richard had never cultivated in himself. "Hey, Dad," Mom said, "dinner's almost ready." Richard nodded, closing the report. "I'll be right down." Justin lingered, eyes falling on the open documents. "More stuff for the Reyes program?" "Just reviewing the quarterly numbers," Richard confirmed. "The educational modules are showing promising results." Justin hesitated, then said, "I've been meaning to tell you, I think what you're doing with that program is pretty cool." Richard looked up, surprised by both the comment and the underlying approval it contained. His relationship with Justin had been strained for years, partly due to the demands of Richard's career, but more significantly because of his impatience with Justin's learning challenges. "Thank you," Richard said simply. "That means a lot." "Bo, session I went to last month," Justin continued. "The one about invisible differences like dyslexia? It was the first time I didn't feel like I needed to hide it or be ashamed." A complicated emotion tightened Richard's chest. Pride in his sons, openness mixed with shame at his own past dismissiveness. For years, he'd viewed Justin's dyslexia as a weakness to be overcome rather than a difference to be accommodated. He'd pushed for extra tutoring, expressed frustration over poor grades, even once suggested that Justin simply wasn't trying hard enough. "I'm glad the program helped," Richard said carefully. "And Justin, I'm sorry I wasn't more understanding before." "About your dyslexia," Justin shrugged, uncomfortable with the emotional territory. "It's fine, Dad." "No, it's not," Richard insisted. "I made you feel like there was something wrong with you when the problem was my perspective. I'm trying to do better now." Justin nodded, accepting the apology without dwelling on it, a generosity Richard knew he hadn't earned. "Do you think," Justin began, then stopped. "What is it? Do you think I could help with the program somehow? Maybe talk to other kids with dyslexia or something?" Richard smiled, genuinely moved by the offer. "I think that's an excellent idea. Dr. Reyes has been wanting to expand the focus on learning differences. Your perspective would be valuable." "Cool," Justin said, visibly pleased. "I'll let you finish up here. Don't be too long or Mom will send out a search party." After Justin left, Richard remained at his desk, contemplating how much had changed. 6 months ago, his priority had been protecting his contracts and public image. Now, he found himself caring about the actual impact of the program and reconnecting with his son in the process. His phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. VA Program Exhibition, Marco Reyes. The quarterly showcase for the Visible Arts program was happening that weekend, and Richard had promised to attend. Marco's architectural series was receiving particular attention, with rumors that a prestigious design magazine planned to feature his work. Richard hadn't spoken much with Marco since the gallery opening 3 months earlier. Their interactions remained polite but distant, understandably so, given how their relationship had begun. But Richard found himself genuinely looking forward to seeing the boys' latest work. The next afternoon, Richard left his office early and drove to the community center where the Visible Arts program held its sessions. He arrived as the exhibition was being set up, participants and volunteers arranging artwork throughout the large open space. Marco stood near the back, carefully, positioning a large architectural rendering on an easel. The piece depicted an innovative design for an inclusive playground, with features specifically adapted for children with various physical differences. Richard approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "That's impressive work, Marco." Marco turned, surprise briefly crossing his face, before his expression settled into polite neutrality. "Mr. Harrington, I didn't expect to see you until tomorrow's opening. I wanted to see the exhibition without the crowds," Richard explained, "and to speak with you privately, if you have a moment." Marco nodded cautiously, setting down his measuring tape. "What about?" Richard gestured to a nearby bench, and they both sat, maintaining a respectful distance between them. "I owe you a proper apology," Richard began. "Not the public one at the press conference, which was necessary but insufficient. A personal one, just between us." Marco studied him silently, his expression unreadable. "What I said to you that night was cruel and inexcusable," Richard continued. "There's no justification for it, and I won't insult you by offering excuses. I just want you to know that I deeply regret my behavior, and I'm working to ensure I never treat anyone that way again." Marco remained quiet for a moment, then asked, "Why did you do it? I've always wondered." The directness of the question caught Richard off guard, but he recognized that Marco deserved honesty. "I think," he started, then paused to gather his thoughts. "I think I've spent most of my life valuing the wrong things: power, appearances, status. I judge people by standards that don't actually matter, and I taught my son to do the same, to his detriment." He met Marco's gaze directly. "Your mother was right, you know. The difference between us wasn't your skin, it was character. Something I've been trying to develop more of these past months." Marco nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty and the apology." Richard smiled slightly. "I don't expect forgiveness, Marco, but I am grateful for the opportunity to learn from my mistake. Your resilience and talent have been instructive. The program has helped a lot of people," Marco acknowledged, "including me, so maybe something good came from that night after all." As they stood to return to their respective tasks, Richard felt a weight lift, not completely, but noticeably. True redemption, he was learning, wasn't a single act or apology, but a continuing process of becoming better than you were before. And sometimes the most important lessons came from the most unexpected teachers. 1 year after that fateful night in the hallway of Westfield Academy, the grand ballroom of the Willard Hotel sparkled with chandeliers and anticipation. Hundreds of guests in formal attire mingled, their conversations creating a gentle hum. Beneath the classical quartet playing in the corner, the occasion, the official launch of the National Foundation for Visible Differences, an expansion of the Elena Reyes program that would bring its initiatives to schools and communities across the country. Marco stood near one of the tall windows, adjusting his tie nervously. At 14, he still felt out of place in formal settings, despite increasing exposure to such events over the past year. His vitiligo had spread slightly, new patches appearing on his neck and one cheek, but he no longer attempted to hide them. Tonight, in his first tailored suit, a gift from the Kincaids, he carried himself with quiet confidence that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "There you are," Dr. Reyes said, approaching with Lily beside her. "The vice president is looking for you. I think they're almost ready to begin the program." Marco nodded, following them through the crowd. The past year had transformed his relationship with Dr. Reyes from mentor to something closer to family. He'd spent countless hours at their home, working on art projects with Lily, discussing architectural concepts with Dr. Reyes's husband, Ace Ock, structural engineer, and gradually healing from years of trying to make himself invisible. They found the vice president in conversation with Elena, who looked elegant in a midnight blue gown. Beside them stood Richard Harrington and his son Justin, both in tuxedos, but with Justin's bow tie slightly askew in teenage rebellion. "Ah, Marco," Vice President Kincaid greeted him warmly. "Ready for your big moment?" Marco smiled nervously. "As ready as I'll ever be." The formal program was set to include several speakers, the Vice President as honorary chairman, Richard Harrington announcing the foundation's initial funding, Dr. Reyes explaining the medical and psychological support initiatives, and most intimidating for Marco, his own brief remarks about the youth advisory board he would be leading. "You'll be wonderful," Elena assured him, straightening his already perfect tie in a mother's universal gesture of both love and anxiety. A staff member approached, signaling that it was time to begin. The guests moved toward their tables as the vice president took the podium. Distinguished guests, friends, colleagues, Kincaid began. Tonight marks not just the launch of a foundation, but the continuation of a journey that began with a moment of cruelty transformed into an opportunity for growth and change. From the stage, Marco could see the diverse gathering, medical professionals who had volunteered their expertise, educators implementing the curriculum in their schools, donors whose contributions would fund expansion, and, most meaningfully, dozens of young people with various visible differences who would benefit from the Foundation's programs. "What began as a single program at one school," the Vice President continued, "has grown beyond our expectations. In just 1 year, the Elena Reyes program has been implemented in 27 schools across the D.C. area. Over 400 educators have completed sensitivity training. 15 scholarships have been awarded to talented students with visible differences. And perhaps most importantly, hundreds of young people have found community and support through the Visible Arts program. The Vice President gestured toward the displays around the ballroom's perimeter, artwork created by program participants, including several of Marco's architectural pieces. "Tonight, we take this initiative national," Kincaid announced. "And to tell you more about that vision, I'm pleased to introduce Richard Harrington, whose commitment to this cause has extended far beyond financial support to genuine partnership and advocacy." As Harrington took the stage, Marco observed the transformation in the man who had once mocked him. Gone was the arrogant dismissiveness, replaced by a humility that seemed genuine rather than performative. Over the past year, Harrington had become increasingly involved in the program's actual work, attending sessions, contributing ideas, leveraging his corporate connections to create opportunities for participants. "Thank you, Mr. Vice President," Harrington began. "When I agreed to fund the Elena Reyes program a year ago, I viewed it primarily as an obligation, a consequence for my behavior. What I didn't expect was how profoundly it would change my perspective." He paused, making eye contact with Marco briefly before continuing. "Harrington Technologies is committing $50 million to establish the National Foundation for Visible Differences, with the goal of implementing these programs in 500 schools nationwide over the next 5 years. But beyond this financial commitment, we're also launching an internship program specifically for young people with visible and invisible differences, creating pathways to careers in technology, design, and business." The announcement drew enthusiastic applause. Justin Harrington, seated at a front table, looked genuinely proud of his father, perhaps for the first time in years. Dr. Reyes spoke next, outlining the Foundation's medical and psychological support. Initiatives, including partnerships with leading dermatologists, plastic surgeons, and mental health professionals specializing in body image and identity. Then it was Marco's turn. As he approached the podium, he felt a momentary flash of panic, remembering all the times he'd tried to make himself invisible to avoid attention. But as he looked out at the audience, his mother's encouraging smile, the Kincaids' proud expressions, Dr. Reyes and Lily giving him subtle thumbs up, he found his voice. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "My name is Marco Reyes, and I'll be chairing the Youth Advisory Board for the National Foundation for Visible Differences." As he continued his carefully prepared remarks about the importance of youth leadership and peer support, Marco realized how far he had come from that night in the hallway. The painful moment that could have further diminished him had instead become the catalyst for growth beyond anything he could have imagined. When the formal program concluded, the vice president raised his glass in a toast. "To seeing beyond appearances," he said, "and to the unexpected journeys that transform us all." Across the room, Richard Harrington met Marco's gaze and nodded slightly, an acknowledgement of their shared journey from adversaries to reluctant allies in a cause neither had anticipated, but both now believed in deeply. The first day of high school always brings a particular blend of anxiety and possibility. For Marco, standing at the entrance of Washington Arts Academy on a bright September morning, that feeling was magnified. This wasn't just any high school, it was one of the most prestigious arts-focused schools in the country, and he was attending on a full scholarship. "You've got this," Elena said, straightening his collar one last time before stepping back. "Remember, they chose you for a reason." Marco nodded, taking a deep breath. The past summer had been transformative. 8 intense weeks in Georgetown University's architecture program, where his talent had flourished under Professor Chen's mentorship. Now, rather than attending his local public high school as planned, he was embarking on a specialized education that would prepare him for the architectural career he once only dreamed about. "I know, Mama," he replied, his confidence genuine rather than forced. "I'll see you after school." As Elena drove away to her job at the Kincaids' residence, now with the title of household manager and a substantial raise, Marco turned toward the imposing building that would be his academic home for the next 4 years. Inside, the hallways buzzed with returning students, greeting friends, and nervous freshmen trying to navigate the complex layout. Marco consulted his schedule, looking for his assigned homeroom. "Need help finding something?" a voice asked. Marco turned to see a girl about his age with long dark hair partially covering her face. As she tucked her hair behind her ear, he noticed the reason. A port wine-stained birthmark covered most of her left cheek. "Homeroom 112?" Marco asked. "Same as mine?" She smiled. "I'm Zoe Chen." "Chen? As in Professor Thomas Chen?" "My uncle," she confirmed. "He mentioned you were starting here. You're Marco Reyes, right?" the architectural prodigy with the amazing vitiligo-inspired designs. Marco felt himself blush slightly at the description. I wouldn't say prodigy. My uncle would, Zoe replied matter-of-factly. He doesn't give praise easily, trust me. As they walked toward their homeroom, Marco noticed something he wouldn't have a year ago. Zoe didn't try to hide her birthmark with her hair when talking to him, the way she had initially. There was a subtle recognition between them, an unspoken understanding about navigating the world with visible differences. The morning passed in a blur of introductions, syllabi, and getting lost twice despite Zoe's guidance. By lunchtime, Marco had begun to relax, impressed by the school's facilities, especially the architecture studio with its professional-grade equipment and materials. In the cafeteria, Zoe waved him over to a table where several other freshmen had gathered. As Marco sat down, he noticed Justin Harrington a few tables away with a group of seniors. Justin spotted him and, to Marco's surprise, left his table to come over. Marco, "Hey," Justin greeted him. "Dad mentioned you'd be starting." "Here. How's the first day going?" "Good, thanks," Marco replied, still slightly discomfited by friendly interactions with a Harrington. "Your dad's doing well?" Justin nodded. "Yeah, actually, he's different now. Better." He hesitated, then added, "The foundation stuff has been good for him. For both of us, really." A genuine smile crossed Justin's face. "Anyway, I'm heading up the design club this year. We meet Thursdays after school. You should come. Your architectural perspective would be really valuable." After Justin returned to his friends, Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Justin Harrington personally inviting you to design club? I thought freshmen had to beg to get in." Marco shrugged, not wanting to explain the complicated history. "We know each other through a foundation." The afternoon brought Marco's favorite class, Introduction to Architectural Design, where the teacher, Ms. Levine, displayed examples of notable work from previous students. To Marco's shock, his own design for the inclusive playground was among them. This concept, Ms. Levine explained, exemplifies how architecture can address social needs while maintaining aesthetic excellence. The designer considered not just how the space would look, but how different bodies would experience it. After class, Ms. Levine asked Marco to stay behind. "Professor Chen has told me about your talent," she said. "I have high expectations, Mr. Reyes." "I'll do my best to meet them," Marco promised. As he left the building at day's end, Marco spotted Zoe sitting alone on a bench, sketching. He approached hesitantly, not wanting to interrupt. "Fashion design," she explained, showing him the detailed clothing sketches in her book. "My medium of choice." Marco sat beside her. "They're amazing." Zoe closed her sketchbook, studying him curiously. "Can I ask you something personal?" Marco nodded, used to questions about his skin. How did you get to the point where you're comfortable with it? Your vitiligo, I mean." She gestured to her own birthmark. "I'm still working on that part." Marco considered the question carefully. It wasn't one moment, more like a series of realizations. Finding people who saw me, not just my skin, creating art that incorporated my difference rather than hiding it. And honestly, surviving the worst thing I feared, public humiliation, and discovering I was stronger than I thought. Zoe nodded thoughtfully. "The Visible Arts program helped me some. I just joined last year." "Wait," Marco said, making the connection. "Are you the Zoe who designed the Perfect Imperfections fashion line for the spring showcase?" She smiled, pleased at the recognition. "That's me. Those designs are what got me accepted here, actually." As they continued talking, comparing experiences and discovering shared interests beyond their visible differences, Marco felt a sense of alignment he'd never expected when he first entered Westfield Academy's hallway that night. As a janitor, his phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "How was your first day?" Marco smiled, typing back, "Great. Made a new friend. Found my place." And he had, not despite his vitiligo, but with it as an integrated part of who he was, an artist, a student, a friend, a son, an advocate. The journey from that hallway confrontation to this moment had been complicated and at times painful, but he wouldn't change it. Sometimes, Marco reflected, The most profound growth comes from the moments we would never choose, but ultimately reshape us. And sometimes, the people who seem most powerful are changed the most of all. As Zoe showed him more of her designs, Marco felt a quiet certainty. This was just the beginning of a story still unfolding, one where difference wasn't a limitation, but a unique lens through which to view and shape the world.